Last April, right when the Midwest was thawing out and everybody in my corner of Illinois started acting like 60 degrees meant it was summer, my life was in that rare sweet spot where nothing felt urgent. I had a steady job doing IT for a mid-sized logistics company outside Chicago. I had a girlfriend I genuinely thought I would marry someday, and my younger brother was a week away from his wedding, which meant my parents were in full production mode with seating charts and flower opinions and those group texts that never end. My brother, Eric, had always been the loud one in the family, the one who could charm a stranger in line at Target and somehow walk out with their life story. And he had been riding that charisma his whole life like it was a permanent coupon. He was also spoiled in a way that did not look spoiled on the surface because he did just enough nice things to keep people guessing, and then he would use that confusion like a shield whenever someone called him out. The wedding was supposed to be simple and classy, a Friday evening ceremony at a renovated barn venue in Geneva, string lights and champagne towers and the kind of playlist that tries to satisfy everybody and ends up sounding like a dentist office with bass. His fiancée, Hannah, was the opposite of Eric, steady and warm and quietly funny, the sort of person who remembered your dog's name and asked follow-up questions a month later like it mattered, which made everybody in my family say things like she balances him, as if a grown man needs a handler instead of a conscience. I liked Hannah a lot, maybe more than I ever admitted out loud, partly because she never competed for attention and partly because she treated me like I existed even when my brother sucked all the oxygen out of the room. My girlfriend at the time was Alyssa, and if you met her you would have thought she was built for calm, because she was soft-spoken and organized and had that clean, curated vibe where her car always smelled like coconut and her calendar always had color coding. We had been together a little over 2 years, and we were in that phase where you start sharing errands and holiday routines and you do not even notice it happening until you look around your apartment and realize half the stuff in your bathroom is not yours. Alyssa was going to the wedding with me, which felt like a milestone in the normal way, and she had been helping Hannah with a bunch of little things like label tags and bridal shower leftovers, so the four of us had been overlapping more than usual. The sudden event that blew up my normal life did not start with a scream or a slammed door. It started with a tiny detail that felt off. The kind of detail you only notice when you are not looking for trouble. It was a Tuesday night, a week before the wedding, and I walked into my apartment after work carrying takeout and this cheap bottle of red wine I had grabbed because it was 2 for 1. And I noticed Alyssa's phone on the counter with the screen lit up like she had just dropped it. There was a text banner from Eric that I could see without trying, something like "you still good for tomorrow," and there was a heart emoji in it, which already felt weird because my brother used emojis the way a toddler uses stickers, but not that kind of emoji with me. I remember standing there for a second, holding a bag of lukewarm tacos, telling myself I was tired and reading too much into it, because sometimes your brain protects your peace by lying to you. When Alyssa came out of the bedroom, she was smiling too hard, like her face was trying to convince mine that everything was normal, and she said, "Hey babe, sorry, I lost track of time," and then she stepped closer and kissed me, and it was a good kiss, practiced and familiar, but her hands were stiff on my shoulders, like she was touching a hot stove and pretending it did not burn. I asked her what her plans were the next day, casually, like I did not care, and she said she might run an errand for Hannah and maybe stop by Eric's place because he needed help with something wedding-related. And that was when the curiosity stopped being curiosity and started feeling like a warning that would not shut up. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the next day my calendar opened up unexpectedly, and I decided I would swing by my brother's condo to drop off a suit accessory he had asked for. A tie clip our grandfather had given me, because Eric had called it meaningful and I had fallen for that word the way I always did. I drove over around mid-afternoon, parking along the curb, noticing his place looked like a wedding staging area. Boxes of favors stacked by the door, garment bags hanging like ghosts. I knocked, no answer, and since I had the spare key that my mom insisted on me keeping because family, I let myself in, telling myself I was being helpful, telling myself I was being a good brother, telling myself every story except the obvious one. The condo was quiet in that way quiet gets loud, and I walked toward the kitchen because I could hear voices coming from somewhere deeper in the place, and I swear on everything I felt my stomach go cold before my eyes even caught up with the scene. The voices were in the living room, low and breathy, and then I rounded the corner and saw my brother standing close to Alyssa. Too close. His hand on the back of her neck like he had practiced it, and her hands gripping his hoodie like she needed something to hold on to. I had just enough time to process the shape of it before he leaned in and kissed her, not a quick peck that you could pretend was a mistake, but a kiss that lasted long enough to have intention, long enough for my brain to register betrayal like it was a sound. I said, "Eric, And my voice came out calm, which is still the weirdest part because inside my chest it felt like something split open. They broke apart so fast it looked rehearsed. Alyssa stepping back like she had been burned, Eric turning toward me with his eyes already scanning for an angle. And for 1 second we all just stood there in the ugly silence of being caught. Then Eric tried to smile, like it was a misunderstanding you could laugh off. And he said, "Bro, you scared the hell out of me." And Alyssa started crying without making noise, just tears sliding down her face like her body knew it had lost. That moment was the climax of the first act, not because it was the loudest moment, but because it cracked the entire foundation of what I thought my life was. And once the foundation cracks, everything else becomes a question. Act 2 Escalation of conflict. If you have never been betrayed by two people at the same time, I hope you never experience it, because it feels like your brain cannot decide which pain to prioritize, so it stacks them on top of each other until you cannot breathe. I remember looking at Eric and realizing that I was not just seeing my brother kiss my girlfriend, I was seeing a pattern, the way he always wanted what other people had, the way he treated boundaries like suggestions, the way he assumed consequences were for other people. I asked him what the hell was going on, and he immediately did what he always did, which was talk faster than the truth could catch him. Telling me it was nothing, telling me Alyssa had been stressed, telling me he was just comforting her, telling me I had walked in at the wrong moment. And the whole time he talked, his eyes kept flicking to Alyssa, not with guilt, but with a warning, like he was silently reminding her what story she was supposed to follow. Alyssa tried to speak and could not get words out at first, and when she finally did, she said, "I am sorry, I am so sorry," in that broken repetitive way people say when they are hoping the phrase itself can rewind time. I asked her how long, and she shook her head and said it only happened a couple times, and then I looked at Eric and he shrugged like a man being accused of taking extra fries, and he said, "Come on, it is not like I am trying to steal your life." And that line was so casual and so cruel that it hit me harder than the kiss itself, because it told me he did not understand what he had done, or he understood and did not care, which might be worse. I left without yelling, not because I was mature, but because I knew if I stayed in that room another minute I was going to do something that would ruin my life along with theirs. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and I parked in my lot and just sat there staring at the windshield, watching a little smear of pollen slide down the glass, thinking about how normal the day had felt before everything broke. Alyssa followed me home in her car, and she stood in the doorway of our apartment like she was waiting for a judge to sentence her, and she started explaining, talking about feeling invisible lately, talking about wedding stress, talking about Eric making her feel seen, and every word sounded like a bargain she was offering instead of remorse. I told her I needed space, and she said please do not do something drastic, and I remember thinking how wild it was that she was worried about my reaction when she had already done the drastic thing. That night, I called my best friend Marcus, who has been the kind of friend who does not just listen but notices what you are not saying, and I told him the bare bones of it, and he went quiet for a second, then he said, "You were going to tell Hannah, right?" The idea of telling Hannah made my stomach twist, because it felt like tossing a grenade into someone else's life, but it also felt like the only moral option, because letting her marry Eric without knowing what he was capable of felt like participating in a lie. I texted Hannah and asked if we could talk the next morning somewhere private, and she replied immediately with a thumbs up and a question mark, and that question mark felt like a weight in my throat. The next day I met Hannah at a coffee shop in St. Charles, the kind with mismatched chairs and a pastry case that always smells like cinnamon, and she walked in with that wedding week glow and exhaustion, holding her phone like it was a life support machine. I asked her to sit, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to tuck them under the table, and I told her I needed to tell her something about Eric and I needed her to hear it all before she reacted. And she tried to laugh like I was about to confess I forgot to RSVP to my own brother's wedding. Then I told her what I saw, and I watched her face change in slow motion, the smile fading, her eyes narrowing, her shoulders stiffening. And when I said Alyssa was there and Eric kissed her, and it did not look like a first-time thing, Hannah's lips parted like she wanted to speak, but her body could not find the words. She did not cry right away, which scared me more than crying would have, because she just stared at the table for a long time, breathing shallow, and then she asked me in this flat voice, "Are you sure?" I told her yes, and she nodded once like she was filing evidence, and then she stood up so fast her chair scraped, and she said, "I need to go," and she walked out without finishing her coffee. I sat there feeling like I had just pushed a domino and now the whole line was falling, but I did not know what shape the collapse would take. Within hours, Eric was blowing up my phone, and when I did not answer, he came to my apartment and banged on the door like he was the one who had been wronged. Marcus was with me, thank God, because I do not know if I could have stayed calm alone. And when I opened the door, Eric was already in performance mode. Eyes wide, hands up, voice loud enough for the neighbors. He said, "What did you tell her, man? What did you do?" And I told her the truth, and he stepped closer and hissed, "You are trying to ruin my wedding." And that sentence was the climax of the second act, because it revealed the core of who he was, a man who could betray two people and still frame himself as the victim. Then he switched tactics, because that is what spoiled people do when consequences show up. They try every door until one opens. He said Alyssa came on to me, he said it was a stupid mistake, he said Hannah is overreacting, he said I should fix this, and when I said I was not fixing anything, he leaned in and said low enough that only I could hear, "If you keep pushing this, I will make sure everybody knows how unstable you have been lately," and I realized in that moment he was willing to burn my reputation to save his fantasy. Marcus stepped between us and told Eric to get out, and Eric left smiling like he had not just threatened me, and that smile followed me for days like a stain. Act 3, an unexpected ally and a discovery. The weird thing about family disasters is that they draw in people you did not expect and reveal who is solid when things get ugly. The day after I told Hannah, she called me, and her voice sounded like it had aged 10 years overnight, and she said she needed to meet again, somewhere quiet, and she needed me to tell her everything I remembered, every detail, because Eric was denying it all and acting like she had lost her mind. We met in a park near the Fox River, sitting on a bench with a view that would have been peaceful in any other context, and she asked me questions like she was building a case. What time was it? Where was his hand? Did Alyssa pull away? Did Eric look surprised? And I answered the best I could, feeling awful that she had to interrogate her own future like this. Then Hannah did something I did not expect. She apologized to me, not for what happened, but for the way my family was already reacting. She told me my mom had called her and said something like weddings are stressful and boys will be boys and do not let Mark get in your head. And hearing that made my chest tighten because it was so familiar, my mom protecting Eric by minimizing harm. Hannah said she was not going to be gaslit into marriage, and she said she believed me, but she needed proof because Eric had a talent for twisting narratives and she could feel herself starting to doubt reality, which is exactly what manipulators want. The unexpected ally turned out to be someone even closer to Eric than I was, his best man. A guy named Jordan who had been friends with him since high school, the kind of friend who had covered for him in college and laughed off his bad behavior as Wild Eric being Wild Eric. Jordan texted me late that night and said, "Can we talk?" And when we met in a parking lot behind a grocery store like we were in some low-budget crime movie, he looked sick, like he had not slept, and he said he heard what happened and he did not want to believe it, but he had seen enough over the years to know it was possible. He told me he had been helping Eric with wedding payments and vendor deposits, and something about the money did not add up, because Eric kept borrowing more even though his parents had already helped and Hannah had paid her share. Jordan said he had checked his own Venmo history and realized Eric had been funneling money to some account with a weird name, and he said he thought it might be gambling because Eric had gotten into sports betting lately and acted like it was a hobby instead of a problem. That discovery shifted everything for me, because it added another layer of truth, the kind that explains behavior without excusing it. If Eric was spiraling financially, it made sense that he was grasping for control wherever he could find it, and a secret affair, even a messy one, would feel like control to someone like him. Jordan said he was willing to show Hannah the receipts, and he said he was done being Eric's cleanup crew, and hearing that felt like a door opening in a house that had been suffocating. We met with Hannah the next morning at her sister's place, a small townhouse in Naperville that smelled like laundry detergent and stress, and Jordan laid everything out, screenshots of transfers, dates, messages from Eric saying he needed more because the venue changed requirements, which was a lie because Hannah had the contract. Hannah stared at the phone screen, her fingers trembling, and then she started crying, not the quiet tear thing, but the kind of sobbing where your whole body shakes because you have been holding yourself together with pure willpower and it finally runs out. She said, "I do not even know who I am marrying," and Jordan looked down and said, "I do not either, not anymore," and I sat there feeling this weird mix of vindication and grief because being right does not feel good when the cost is someone else's heartbreak. That was the climactic moment of Act 3 for me, the realization that the kiss was not an isolated betrayal, it was a symptom of a bigger rot, and now we had proof that could not be brushed off with charm. Act 4, the climax. Friday came anyway because weddings are like trains once they are in motion, and even if you see the wreck ahead, stopping it takes more force than most people have. Hannah had not officially called it off yet, partly because she was still hoping for some impossible explanation that would make everything make sense, and partly because her family had flown in and the pressure was enormous, and partly because Eric was doing what he always did when cornered, acting confident and loud and insisting everything was fine. My parents were walking around like wedding day was a sacred ritual that could not be interrupted by facts. And my mom kept sending me texts like, please do not cause drama today, which is such a wild thing to say to the person who got betrayed. But that is what families do when they are invested in appearances. I went to the venue because Hannah asked me to come, not as a groomsman or a guest, but as someone she trusted to stay grounded if everything went sideways. Marcus came with me because he did not want me walking into that circus alone, and Jordan was there too, looking pale in his suit, holding a folded speech like it was a piece of evidence. The barn venue was beautiful in that Pinterest way, with beams and white drapery and little votive candles everywhere. But under the beauty you could feel tension, like the air was too tight. I saw Alyssa there, and just seeing her in a dress she had bought for a wedding that might not happen made my head spin. She approached me near the restrooms, eyes glossy, and she said, please, can we talk? And I said, not here, not today, and she grabbed my arm lightly and said, I never meant for this to happen. And I told her in a low voice that meaning is not the same as choosing, and she let go like my skin burned her. She walked away and I realized she was scared, not just of losing me, but of being exposed in front of everyone, which told me again that her priority was the story, not the truth. The ceremony time hit and people took their seats, and the music started, and Hannah had not appeared yet. Eric was at the front, smiling too hard, whispering to the officiant, glancing back toward the doors like he expected his bride to materialize on schedule no matter what he had done. Minutes passed, and the whispers started, and my mom's face tightened the way it does when she is about to blame someone else for something Eric caused. Then Hannah walked in, not down the aisle, but from the side door near the prep room, and she was not holding a bouquet. She was holding her phone. She walked straight toward Eric, stopping a few feet away, and the entire room went silent in that stunned way people get when they realize they are about to witness something they will talk about for years. Hannah spoke clearly, no yelling, no shaking voice, just cold clarity, and she said, Eric, I need you to answer one question in front of everyone. And Eric laughed a little like it was a playful bit, and he said, babe, what is this? And Hannah held up her phone and said, did you kiss Mark's girlfriend last week in your living room, yes or no? The sound that came out of the room was like a collective inhale, and I felt my heart pounding so loud I thought other people could hear it. Eric's face flashed through emotions fast, surprise, anger, calculation, and then he did exactly what I expected. He looked at me and pointed and said, this is him. He is doing this to me. He is jealous. He always has been. My mom stood up immediately like she had been waiting for her cue, saying, Hannah, honey, this is not appropriate, and Hannah looked at her and said, I am about to legally attach my life to your son. I think appropriate left the building a while ago. Eric tried to step closer to Hannah, lowering his voice like he could contain the blast radius, and Hannah stepped back and said, do not touch me. Jordan walked forward then, voice shaking, and he said, Eric, tell the truth, and Eric snapped at him to shut up, but Jordan did not shut up, and he held up his own phone and said, while we are here, do you want to explain the money too, because I have the transfers? And suddenly the room had two bombs, the betrayal and the secret finances, and Eric's eyes went wild like a trapped animal. That was when the wedding blew up, not metaphorically, but socially, emotionally, the way a room full of people can explode without a single physical force. Eric started yelling, not a controlled argument but full rage, blaming me, blaming Hannah, blaming Jordan, blaming the stress, blaming the world, and then he did the thing that made everybody freeze. He looked at Hannah and said, fine, you want truth, here is truth, I did kiss her, and if I wanted to, I could have taken her from him a long time ago because he never deserved her, and the cruelty in that sentence was like a slap across the whole room. Alyssa made a sound then, a small broken sound, and she covered her mouth like she was going to throw up. My dad shouted, Eric, enough, and Eric turned on him too, yelling that nobody ever supported him the way they supported me, which was hilarious in the darkest way, because Eric had been supported his entire life. He just could not stand that it was not unlimited. Hannah stood there listening to him unravel, and then she said quietly, this is who you are, and I am done. And she turned and walked out of the venue in her wedding dress with her head held high, her sister following her like a bodyguard. Everything after that moved like a nightmare montage. Guests stood up, chairs scraped, people whispered. My mom cried and tried to chase Hannah. My aunt argued with my mom. The officiant stood there holding a binder like he had been summoned to the wrong planet, and Eric, instead of collapsing in shame, grabbed a microphone from the DJ table like he was about to make a speech. He started ranting, saying Hannah was humiliating him, saying I was a traitor, saying the wedding was cursed, And then, in the most Eric move possible, he shouted that if there was not going to be a wedding, then nobody was going to enjoy the party either, and he stormed over to the vendor coordinator and started demanding refunds on the spot. The climactic moment of Act 4 was not just Hannah confronting him. It was Eric choosing destruction over accountability in real time, in front of everyone, proving beyond doubt that he would rather burn everything than admit he was wrong. ACT 5 The Resolution and Aftertaste Reflection. The days after were quieter in the way it gets quiet after a storm, when the air feels wrong and you keep expecting thunder. Hannah stayed with her sister and started the awful practical process of canceling vendors and dealing with family who wanted to spin the narrative into something more comfortable, like a misunderstanding, like cold feet, like a moment of stress, anything except what it was. Jordan stepped down as best man, obviously, and he told Eric he was done, and for the first time I saw my brother look truly alone, because charisma only works when people are willing to be fooled. Alyssa moved out of our apartment the next morning, and she tried to talk again, trying to explain feelings and confusion and how Eric manipulated her, and I listened longer than I should have because part of me still loved the version of her I thought I knew. When she said Eric made me feel special, I told her in a flat voice that special is not the same as safe, and I asked her if she ever planned to tell me, and she looked down and said I thought it would stop, and that answer was my closure because it meant she was willing to keep lying as long as the consequences did not land on her. She packed her things and left, and the apartment looked different immediately, not emptier exactly, but like the air had room to move again. My family went into damage control mode, which in my family means pretending the truth is negotiable. My mom called me and said I wish you had handled this privately, and I told her I did not handle it at all, I just refused to lie, and she said Eric made a mistake, and I told her no, he made choices. My dad was quieter, and when he finally came over to talk, he sat at my kitchen table and stared at his hands like he was seeing his own parenting reflected back at him. He said I did not think he would go that far, and I said I did not either, but here we are, and he nodded like he was accepting a loss he could not fix. Eric texted me 3 days after the wedding, a long message that looked like an apology at first, but halfway through it turned into blame, saying I should have protected him, saying brothers do not betray brothers, which is the funniest and saddest thing, because he used the concept of brotherhood like a weapon right after he shattered it. I did not respond, not out of spite, but because I finally understood that arguing with him was like arguing with a fire, it just consumes oxygen and leaves you tired. Hannah met me for a walk a week later because she wanted to return a few things that had ended up in my car during the chaos, and we walked along the river again, the trees greener now, the world still moving forward like it always does, indifferent to personal devastation. She told me she had moments where she missed him, not because he deserved it, but because her brain was still attached to the dream she had built, and I told her that made sense because grief is not logical. She thanked me again for telling her, and I told her I was sorry that telling her had hurt her, and she said something was going to hurt me either way, at least now it is my pain and not my future. The resolution for me was not a triumphant victory, because I did not win anything, I just stopped losing myself to other people's lies. I started therapy, which I had avoided for years because I thought I could outthink my feelings, and I learned that betrayal does not just break trust, it rewires how you see your own judgment. I leaned on Marcus a lot, and he never let me romanticize the past. He would say you are grieving a person who did not exist, and it stung every time because it was true. A couple months later, I heard through family channels that Eric tried to get back with Hannah, that he showed up at her work once with flowers and a speech, and she called security, which made me proud of her in this quiet, protective way. I also heard he had some gambling debt, that he had been betting big on games and hiding it, and suddenly the money chaos made sense. Part of me felt pity because addiction is real and ugly, and part of me felt rage because addiction does not excuse cruelty, and he had been cruel even when he was sober. My family started floating the idea that I should forgive him because family is family, and I found myself stuck in the moral dilemma that still lingers. Because here is the open ending, the part that sits in my chest like an unfinished song. If Eric truly gets help, if he genuinely changes, if he owns what he did without blame or excuses, do I let him back into my life, or do I protect the peace I fought to build and accept that some doors close for a reason? I do not have a clean answer, and maybe that is the point, because life does not tie itself up in a neat bow just because we want it to. Finale Part 5 Aftertaste Reflection. When I look back on it now, what haunts me is not the kiss itself, even though that image still flashes in my mind sometimes when I least expect it, like a cruel pop-up ad I cannot block. What haunts me is how easy it was for my brother to choose himself over everyone else, and how long my family trained us to treat his choices like whether unavoidable, and not his fault. The lesson I keep turning over is simple and heavy. Loyalty that demands silence is not loyalty. It is captivity. And love that survives only when you accept disrespect is not love. It is habit wearing a mask. So if you ever find yourself standing in a moment where the truth will blow up someone's comfortable story, and you are tempted to keep quiet to preserve the peace, remember that peace built on lies is just a calm surface hiding rot underneath, and sooner or later it caves in, whether you are ready or not.